to episode 6 of Modular podcast on oscillators. It's going to be a general overview of what you might find with oscillators in modular, analog, digital, wavetables, dual oscillators. Just sort of big overview of what you might find, what we're using, how we're using it, and some patch examples. We've got a normal modular podcast trio. Greg, how are you?
Not too bad, Ben. A couple of new modular acquisitions. Picked up an Erica black hole DSP.
Oh, yeah. How's that?
And the Bosumilus Terratas altar. It's really nice as well.
How's the black hole DSP?
It's really good. I've only been playing with it for a day now, but really enjoying it already. You'll hear some of it in the patches I made for this podcast.
Yeah, I'll bring patch notes up. I noticed them in the screenshots. What about the Bosumilus Terratas? How's that?
That's really good. I've not owned the older version, so I've nothing to compare it to, but it is really nice. It's the best digital drum module I've come across so far.
Yeah, the original one's really cool. I think it takes you through such a wide range of stuff that it's quite hard to pin it down, whereas some of the other drum modules sort of have a character that's a bit easier to pick out.
Yeah, we mentioned it before. We mentioned a particular one, which we won't say.
Really obvious. There's lots of stuff like that though that are quite unique, and then you hear them and you're like, yeah, I know what that is straight away. Matthew, how are you?
Good, thanks. Yeah, I seem to every month now I seem to have acquired yet another surge panel. But
how long are you going to keep going with that?
Well, I hope it's going to. Well, I hope it's going to stop. But I'm lying. But no, it's great. Yeah, I just got this TKB here now, so I've just got like this 3-panel system as well. That's what I try and keep it like that for a little bit.
Not going to stay like that for long. That shelf doesn't extend any further though, does it?
Yeah, so that's quite a good thing in a way. Yeah, really enjoying them together.
And I'm sure not for the first time, but I'm sure not for the only time. We've got James Cigler. How are you,
Hey,
James?
guys. Good, man. How are you?
Yeah, good. Good to have you on.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Really good to see you back at videos again.
Oh, thank you.
We were just saying off air then, I bought the Sport Modulator right after watching your video. It's great.
Yeah, I'm really glad people like him. I mean, the sort of time away from them was just from a busy day job, but I really like seeing all the comments and seeing that people get a lot out of them. And you know, I started doing them way back when no one put out any manuals or anything like that. So the whole idea was to just share what I was figuring out, how these things worked and everything. So it's really cool now too that the community's bigger, and it really helps like a lot, even more people sort of not be too afraid of what these do and how to figure them out. And I really try and get people to open up and experiment with them a little bit more than kind of looking at it as like, oh, that's the, you know, does X module. Yeah, I get to open people's minds a little bit about some of the weirder ones or the less understood ones.
Yeah, well, there were certainly some of the first videos I were watching outside of sort of Raoul's World of Sims for the Dope for Stuff. There was you and not much else until a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I was really happy when you started putting videos out, because I definitely felt like this pressure to keep putting videos out, and it was getting harder and harder, and I was like, oh, okay, he's making great videos. I can just step back and I don't.
Well, I'm in a slow period. I'm having a bit of a slow come down at the minute, so it's good. My output's a little slow for other work reasons as well. It's good. It's the more the merrier.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And it's certainly something that, you know, when talking to manufacturers, people ask this, you know, when we do a video for this thing, and when people, you know, I always say send it to everyone. Get all of us to do videos at different times. Everyone approaches it so differently, I think, and it sometimes just takes one person's view to change your mind, and that might be yours, it might be mine, it might be Ken.
Oh, totally.
Who, Milo Melodies, Alex. Everybody does it sort of differently, so I like it when I think it was I forget his name now, suit and tie guy at STG. He set one Bancato filter out to 5 people all at once, and not one person's video sort of did the same thing beyond the initial.
Oh, awesome. I have to check those out.
Beyond the initial, this is what the low pass sounds like. Everyone then went a different way, and I thought it was really cool.
Oh, cool.
And at least from my end, I didn't speak to anyone about it. It wasn't a, oh, well, if you're going to do this, I'll do something different. It would, you know, so, yeah. Well, cool. Let's get into it. We'll sort of go through all the different types of oscillators, and we've got some patch examples and some ideas. I guess we start at the most basic, which would be just a single analog oscillator. Does anybody use them much, or have you sort of grown out of them? Do you still like them for certain things?
I mean, I've just recently sold. I mean, when I first started, I just had nothing but DO for just the standard oscillators. I had about 8 of those, and then I had 2 of the complex. Not the complex. I've got the name of it now. What are they called? Anyway, the bigger ones. Those 2. But yeah, I had those for absolutely years before I actually changed, and they're absolutely superb. You know, really
the high-end VCO.
That's it, the high-end VCO. Yeah.
Had them, is it CEM chips that have now run out or something?
Yeah, that's it. So they're not doing those anymore. But they're superb, really, really good.
I mean, I tend to like just basic single analog oscillators, as you can see sort of there, when it's modeling a particular thing. Like the AGH mini-mod stuff, free oscillators, it's clearly a mini-mu, that's what it's modeling. And they sound absolutely amazing. But for some reason, I tend not to go to them for much else, even though they're very capable, those particularly and other oscillators. I tend to look at them that way. I think I tend to drift for other things.
Right. Well, I mean, I suppose that they're really good at doing one thing could be an argument for it. You know, they are very, I wouldn't say, well, you can make any sound from them, but they're narrowing what they can do from a wave point perspective. But yeah, I mean, obviously combine 3 good analog oscillators together and you get a super wide sound, you know, all detuned.
Yeah. Well, I think
I still have I have an AFG that it's too big to have in the performance case all the time, but it's probably like my favorite single sounding oscillator, and all those outputs and the sub out and everything. So every once in a while, it's like I just want that sound, and I'll put that in the skiff or have it somewhere. The DPO is usually my go-to, but I would say like maybe just shy of half the time I'm using each one almost like they could be 2 separate oscillators. I may blend some FM between the 2 back and forth, or maybe you know, the modulation oscillators modulating the wave shaper or something like that. But I'd say close to half the time they could be just two separate VCOs.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I have an AFG, and I know you have as well, Ben. Don't you? We like them.
Same thing. I mean, James has a little like Performance 6U case there. I have all this, and I still not have the AFG in it. Come out in a minute. It's in a case under the desk, but it sounds amazing. Nothing quite touches the AFG.
Yeah.
Me. And I getting into it, and I'd see people with 2 AFGs, and I'm like, that must be the holy grail of.
Oh yeah, I had to, and I sized down to this smaller case from a big Dope for Monster years ago, and I regret selling the second one. Yeah.
Really, even with the space they take up.
Yeah, it could be one of those where it's like every once in a while I would take, like maybe I'd now take this skiff and just put the 2 in there and just make like a full live wire skiff for, you know, a couple weeks or something. But yeah, it just has such a sound, and they had a nice FM quality where it didn't FM very tightly, but you'd blend it and it would just kind of destabilize in like a very thick way between the 2.
I really like the FM on those. There is something on that you can't really kind of put your finger on it, you know. You know, and obviously there's 2 as well, isn't there? You can have it, you know. Yeah, it's just so nice, is that FM.
One of my favorite tricks with one of them is take the sub out. I don't think it matters if it's saw or square, but I think I use saw, and patch it to its own exponential FM input, and turn that up a little bit. You've got to retune everything once you do that, but it just like fattens it up a little bit. It's like the pitch is wavering this tiny amount a lot, and it just gets thick sounding.
Yeah, the AFG had a really gorgeous sync sound as well.
Oh, that's right. Yes, yeah, especially with the harmonic animation stuff.
Yeah.
Alien Source, is it?
Yeah.
Wave out. I've always liked the sound of that with a sub underneath it.
Yeah, strangely, the Alien Saws is quite a dull sound.
Yeah, it's a little muted. It's not like super bright and buzzy.
Yeah, you'd think saw wave, loads of top end, full fizzy sound, and it wasn't, which helped it sit in a lot of sort of mixes and stuff that I was doing with it. But the pulse is much brighter, the animated pulse.
Yeah, kind of in the way like a phaser pedal kind of like smears brightness and stuff. It kind of did that.
Yeah. Well, that sort of links nicely. You said the DPO using them as two oscillators. As a bit of an in-between sort of dual complex oscillator and single, I was using IntelliGel Dixies. I managed to get a lot of 4 Mark 1 Dixies early on. So 4 HP and not much space for 4 oscillators. And I was trying to do sort of the opposite of trying to use them to make a sort of complex oscillator. The linear FM on it was really cool, but the exponential, it was one of those that having all 4 trying to create like an FM operator type thing, the tuning went so far off by the time you got to like a tone you liked that it sort of put me off. I think going the sort of, I don't know why, I just seem to have more stable results from a dual oscillator like a DPO or the Sputnik than I have using 2 Dixies. I don't know why. I don't know if I was just patching up FM that was too deep and just pulling the like root notes so far out, or
that could be a little bit. I mean, the way I end up using the DPO is I could have 2 separate oscillators, a couple VCAs, and all the other things that they're built into it, and arguably that could be more flexible in the same amount of space. But I like that it's like mostly set up for me to do FM if I wanted to. So a lot of times maybe I'll use each oscillator as its own part of a larger voice, and then they'll usually be tuned in some kind of musical interval, and then I'll just start to play with FM between the 2, or cross-modding each other, or modulating the wave shape, and I don't have to like go, oh, let me repatch that just to try it out. I can turn up the knobs, sounds great, cool, doesn't sound good, all right, whatever, just turn the knobs back down. So that immediacy and quickness, I think, is what I like. I mean, other than I really like the sound, I like that aspect of it, and that's a worthy trade-off for me, for it being arguably less flexible than it being a bunch of individual modules.
I think it's quick, and it encourages, like you said, it encourages you to do it when it's just a knob turn away.
Yeah. I really like that aspect of it, and it works really well in performance too. A lot of times, just the linear cross mod, or even just the whatever the lower pitched one, linear modulating the higher pitched one, adds this nice growly timbre, and I can just blend that in, usually just by hand with the FM index knob. So that aspect works really well for me playing live too.
Yeah, well, that's a good point to bring up your patch example with a sort of drone patch that you've done from the DPO.
Yeah, that's probably close to how I use it a lot, where I'm using a good deal of the outputs, and I'll create kind of 3 or 4 textures or voices of an overall sound, and then I sort of blend between them as I'm playing. So usually one sound is kind of the primary sound, and then the other ones are secondary ones. Like there I had the mod to mix doing a ring mod sound. I was taking the sine wave out of VCO-A through the shapes wave shaper to have a second wave shape sound, and then the saw out, I think, of VCO-A is going through the Twin Peaks filter. So I have like one dual oscillator that ends up making anywhere from like 3 to 5 kind of different sounds in the overall voice that I can either just stack all wide open, or be blending and crossfading them with the Optimixes.
Yeah, well, that's what I wanted to ask, was that how were you going about, because people can listen to this, and links in the descriptions and things for all these examples. You've got a clear droning part, and then you've got the percussive plucks, which have that sort of nice Optimix low-pass gate ring, and then it looks like in that patch you've got the woggle bug modulating the filter. He said it's got the saw wave in.
Yeah.
So I mean, how many parts is it? Is that about 4?
Yeah, I think so.
And then, what's the, just out of curiosity, what's the shaping doing on the audio damage one? I'm just sort of trying to follow patch cables back. And
that one is just, it's a very different sound than the final out on the DPO, but it's doing what would be like, you know, a similar range. It's kind of adding a low, buzzy tone. So, whereas if I remember right, I think I had VCO-B tuned up into the higher range, and VCO-A was in the lower range, or maybe I've gotten that backwards. But the shapes just ends up being a brighter version of, you know, the VCO-A voice. Since you only get triangle, sine, and saw. Saw is obviously very distinct sounding. So I like to take the sine out of VCO-A and put that through some kind of wave shaper. I used the Piston Honda a lot. I just recently got the shapes to try and make some more room in the performance case, and that's been doing that wave shaping duty. And then the levels are all just sort of blended by hand with the Optimix, which is one of my favorite things with the Optimix and the strike inputs is, you know, as you turn the, you know, control or you just open the VCA, you hear the strike less and less. So you can kind of be blending between this percussive sound with the control all the way down and just a wide open droney sound as you turn the control up. I recently discovered an interesting behavior where if you don't send it a short trigger and you send it like a longer gate, you actually get this sort of ducking sound on the falling part of the gate, which sometimes is like you don't want it, and other times it's like, oh, this is really neat, and you get this kind of cool pumping sound and you can work with it. But I've had the Optimix since like it's, you know, beta, and I don't know, that's the first I've discovered that behavior, so that's kind of a cool.
I won't take it too far off topic into low pass gates, but the RYO aperture low pass gate does that. It has, I think they call it a clan input, which is the same sort of gate to trigger converter.
Oh, okay.
But that does the same thing, and I haven't noticed it on my Optimix. I'll have to try it where you think any voltage in that will just ping the sort of circuit, but it doesn't. It definitely reacts in some way, but very differently to putting it in the CV. It's strange.
Yeah, and it actually, even though I don't think technically it's supposed to, but attenuating those trigger signals has a very slight effect too. I notice that a lot with the MMG too, those strike and exit inputs. If you attenuate the triggers going in, you can get a much more subtle result or impulse to the module. But yeah, in fact, I thought it was maybe something that just happens on the Rev 2 Optimix, but it does it with my Rev 1 Optimix too. So
that's cool. Well, certainly, and as I said, all the links will be in the description for this. But the DPO Drones example from James, a really good way, as we were just saying, to one oscillator or one dual oscillator, and you can easily hear 3 or 4 layers happening, mixing in and out, which is interesting. In a different way, just sort of backtracking to single oscillators, but the sort of full voice thing. The DivKid's Batelia, however you say it. I'm not known for saying things right anyway. But that sounds really good. It's just a single oscillator, and it's one of the only times with Analogue that I tend to not want to mix in a couple of oscillators. I don't know what it is about that thing. The filter sounds amazing. The oscillator sounds amazing. It's just really satisfying from one filter, one oscillator. I tend to do more than that when it's analog. I like stacking things up and feedback on the filter and things like that. But just to sort of show that what one oscillator and one filter can do in the DivKid, that's the classic analog, I think we'll call it.
Oh yeah, that sounded great.
Really simple. I mean, I was trying on the filter more than the mix of the oscillator, but you know, a bit like the AFG, having a sub out, a saw, a little bit of noise on the mixer that comes with the module. It's just super fat for a single oscillator. So that's another one to check out. Sticking with analog, what are some? Well, we'll go to the complex dual sort of oscillators. Has anyone managed to try a few of the different ones? Sputnik, Eurogenerator, Verbos.
I mean, I have the Verbos one, which is fantastic, and I totally echo what James is saying though about the like I said, I have 9 or 10 of the Dorfer oscillators really, you know, and I used to because I'm into the kind of West Coast sound thing anyway, I tried to make that kind of thing with those oscillators. And yes, I did. It was, completely did all the same things. But there's just something about when you get the two in one from a functionality point of view and performance point of view. Like as James was saying, you can just do things and then just completely have things kind of locked together or open. And I thought it wouldn't make such a big difference. I just thought, well, just going to be two oscillators in there. But there is something about that actual functionality and design that just takes you to a different place when you do have them. I really didn't think it would do.
I've managed to try a couple of different ones against each other. I think the Verbos is a slightly softer tone than...
Yeah, when I was doing the rounds looking for, I decided I wanted one. And of course, everyone was going like DPO, and fantastic. It's great, what a choice. But I just was in the right place at the right time and just happened to go for the Verbos one, and I'm really glad. And it's not that this is better than the other or the other's better than this one. I just really like what you just said, Ben, really. It's almost like a softer, lower tone to it. And
it's very like meaty sounding. It's very like just aggressive is the wrong word, because I think people will use aggressive in a negative or like it's harsh or something. But it's just very I don't know how to describe it, but it's just very meaty and strong and
it's got a width, I think, to it. I would say it's wider and softer than the DPO. DPO excels at maybe higher, more chaotic kind of tones, but the complex oscillator has just got this softer, wider sort of sound, I think.
It's kind of thick, woolly, like a sort of vintage bass fuzz type. It just seems...
It has that, but then, obviously when you just turn up like the modulation index with them and get that, you can get fantastic kind of bell-type tones, but they will be softer. And that's a really good point. And again, like in most things that people say in the modular is get both, They would definitely sit well together because of their differences.
Oh yeah, they sound very, very different. I hadn't played with any of them until a friend of mine got one of the performance system configurations where it's like a complex oscillator, harmonic oscillator, and the sequencer and a couple things. And I went over to kind of show him like how to patch all this stuff up, and here's how it relates to the classic fixed architecture synthesizer he's used to. And I was just blown away by how it sounded. It was such a like a compliment in sound styles, and it just sounded so beefy and kind of like loud in a way. My initial thought was like it kind of sounded like if you ran a regular oscillator through like a clean guitar amp, like where you have these kind of like...
That's a good point.
Yeah, that tone. Not a Marshall, but like like a loud Fender Twin.
There is just some other tone to it that is, like I said, there's this width, this wider kind of dynamic range almost.
Yeah.
But certainly, I would never sort of push anyone over one or the other. Like it's not that this is better than a DPO or the DPO is better. They really do sound different to each other.
Yeah, I think it totally comes down to whichever one kind of fits in. Like I played his for a really long time because I started to like, does this have to replace my DPO? And after a while, and then coming home and listening, it's like, well, I kind of like some of these ranges of the wave shaper on the final output, and I like how I can sneak different things in, and could be because I'm so comfortable with the DPO and I sort of know it like the back of my hand or whatever. But it totally comes down to personal preference, which I think is really cool about that.
Well, that's it. I'm so glad that manufacturers aren't trying to sound too like each other.
Exactly. Yeah.
If you buy the same components, etc. I'm so glad that these are different from each other, even though they are both dual oscillators, as it were.
Mm-hmm. The one, like I said, it's not about better or worse in any way, is it? It's preference, and I think if you were to put them in a line of, and this isn't a one's the best at one end and one's not, but if you've got the Verbos and then the DPO, I think at the other side of the DPO is a Sputnik.
Right.
because on that modulation bus it will do audio rate CV over the wavefold. It will go, and in a good way. I don't mean like it's harsh and horrible, but it will go a lot harsher, a lot easier, I think.
Right.
But it's funny, they all share that same architecture. I'm going to pull them all up so people can sort of see how similar they all are. But I don't know, the folding on the Verbos and the DPO, it's just a case of having CV over it, isn't it? It's not, the oscillator isn't tied in a CV sense to it, is it? Or do they and I've missed it?
On the DPO, you can have like VCOA, the sine wave of VCOA is normaled into the Modbus signal, which then is distributed to, I always forget the name, shape, angle, and fold. And then you have attenuators there for the amount. And then so you have a global mod amount.
Right. I
can't remember now if the Verbos, the Verbos does that too. You can switch if you want it to modulate AM, FM, or shape. And then you get that similar connection. Although I think it may use a triangle instead of a sine. I can't remember.
Yeah, I think. Well, I'm trying to remember the names too.
Yeah, well, I'll pull the images up and people can see how they all share this same architecture, but yet do sound different. So starting with the DPO that we were talking about, obviously 2 oscillators, the mod bus in the middle, the wavefolding, the angle and the shaping. Similar with the Sputnik, 2 oscillators, modulation bus, syncing on a switch, the timbre and the harmonics being even and odd, and same for the Verbos. But I think the Sputnik goes further. I haven't had all 3, even listening to them all within the same week in person. They're all sort of separate experiences, but it's sort of funny how they all go different approaches with stuff.
Yeah, I'd agree with your statement on the Sputnik. You can take it into I'm going to use the word harsh, but not in a bad way, but kind of more like complex, buzzy, noisier ranges than some of the others will. And I think it's maybe because the FM can respond faster or something. The DPO, I definitely feel is like on the smoother side, particularly the CV of the shape and angle controls and everything. It's a little more smoothed out. So at like audio rates, it isn't quite as bright as maybe the Sputnik gets when you're modulating at audio rates, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting that one thing I didn't really think about it until something you said to me, Matthew, that on the Roland System 100 that you've got, the envelopes are sort of a little slow to react and a little drunk. And it's kind of funny how the filter topology, be it a ladder or a diode or a polybox or a wasp, and the oscillators seem to be the 2 things that people think, if I get this oscillator and filter, it will sound like this synth that I like. But I think it's always that sort of sum of the parts type thing.
Absolutely.
So if the DPO's CV inputs are responding differently, forget about that it sounds different for a minute. The fact that it responds differently will lend you to a different tone and a different way of working. And like you said, James, that could literally be the only difference, that maybe the CV-ins on the Sputnik are just a little bit faster to react. There's no sort of slew-in going on. And I think that has such an effect on the overall sound. People talk about the Roland envelopes being super snappy from like the 100M, but the System 100's really lazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, totally.
They almost give it like a low-pass gate effect almost. There's just that little bit of a, well, I don't want to call it delay, but it's just something.
They almost like lag, don't they? Like you set what would be a short, fast envelope into the filter, and it still sort of just sags in that bottom of the shape a little bit, I think.
It sounds great, but it's like, again, it's playing to the strength of like knowing, I'll know when to use that envelope or when to patch something from the system into it,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love it because of that idiosyncrasy.
Yeah, that's some of my favorite modules are all that way. They have some sort of, some people could see it as a drawback or a hindrance, but I always look at it as like some, like you said, an idiosyncrasy that you can exploit and like help make shine, and it becomes that much more unique and interesting as a result.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, So just just a side note, as we are talking about oscillators, that don't forget about the other stuff. I think that's why we did the second episode on envelopes, which seemed like an almost lame topic at the time. We just talk about envelopes, and then actually, I really liked that episode.
Oh, totally.
It's funny, isn't it, how it literally just makes a shape that rises and falls again, but
all of us keep trying to champion the utility modules, and I don't even really almost class the envelope as a utility module. It's an essential, but it's easy to go in for the sexy stuff, like the filters, get all the limelight, or even oscillators do, but you can't forget about all these utility stuff. That's what really makes your system.
Oh,
and
yeah,
they're almost
absolutely.
as diverse as filters and oscillators. There's as many different types of envelopes as there are oscillators or filters.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Everybody looks at, the big shiny new modules, and oscillators and filters are always going to stand out, but forget about this stuff. It's really important.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's a common mistake for anyone who's just getting into it, wants to fill a little case. You just want to put the kind of sexy noise-making devices in there.
Yeah.
You've not really got a usable system.
Yeah.
We'll touch on it a bit later, but you can make noise with envelopes as well. They can essentially be oscillators at audio rate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that your patch, James, the DPO drone patch, really sings that. It's literally one. Granted, it's two because it's the dual oscillator, but it's just the DPO.
Yeah.
And you're hearing all these different layers, and you've managed to get so much out of it. If you'd have filled that 6U case with 5 different types of oscillators, you might not have got much more out of it because you'd have less space for all these utilities to pull these different sounds out and modulate it and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah, or conversely, like if I were to have that as 2 separate oscillators and the VCAs and all the individual modules, it can be too sort of unwieldy to, even literally get your hands in, but to sort of play live, because I can just go nuts on the FM depth control or the Modbus amount or these things I can be much more impulsive with, rather than to be very careful that I don't bump something or unpatch something that was critical to setting up that sound. And it makes it also easier to set up the patch too. I can have this idea in my head, oh right, so I want that to go through there, and it also can challenge me a little bit too, where it's like, okay, I just have the DPO. How can I make this sound as big as possible? Because I just have that and some other modules to fit with it, and I need to make a wider sound stage. So I like that aspect of it too.
Yeah. Sort of rounding up on analog before we move on to sort of digital oscillators people will find. Anything really sort of unique? There's obviously a lot of wide range in digital now. And a lot of development over the last couple of years in digital as well. But anything particularly unique that we don't see anywhere else?
Analog is analog. I tend to prefer, if I'm not going through a filter, I prefer an analog oscillator. You mentioned it in your interview with Tony Rolando about putting that triangle wave post filter. That for me needs to be an analog oscillator.
Right.
Which sounds better.
So you're always after some analog, but you're not. It can be the filter, and then you go digital oscillator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's going to sound analog after the filter anyway.
Yeah.
For me.
And I think the important thing is, in use, it all feels the same.
Yeah.
And that's not what we're going to do here in the rest of the show, which is better, analog or digital. It's
nothing to do with that.
It's an absolute nonsense argument for me. They've both got their strengths. And in use, people say, oh, well, if I want digital, I'll use a computer. Staring into a laptop's very different.
Oh, yeah. No, I don't think I could ever go back to using a computer for everything I do here. Even if I had all digital modules, it's so different.
Yeah, feels completely different. I don't have one, but you've got some patch examples for us, Matthew, with the harmonic oscillator from Verbos.
Yeah, great. It's just such a good module. Obviously, a nod to the past from Buchler there, but it's just that is, if you talk about unique in from what we've just been talking about, the single analog oscillator, then the dual. This is kind of something again, which splits main sine wave into like 8 harmonics of that, and each one of these harmonics can have CV control, and they've got like a mixer input for them as well, so you can change the volume of each one of the harmonics. But having CV control of those is fantastic. And then you've got like I think it's like the Harmonic Scan, so you can bias where you are in that harmonic range. So if you want to go down the kind of lower end, or you want to get rid of the lower end and just concentrate on the higher end harmonics.
It's almost like a bandpass filter, isn't it? In that you can sort of shoot through which bit of the thing is more prominent in the final output.
And you've also got the width of that as well. So how many are included within that sort of scan, as it were.
But it's the only analog additive synthesis thing that I know of, which is having amplitude control over separate sine waves.
Yeah.
It's the only one, as far as I know. Well, in terms of that scanning and the drone, you did 2 different patches for us. How were they different? I'll pull up the Harmonic Drone first. You could sort of talk us through what was going on. The one thing I wanted to ask you about it, just as I pull up the patch, there's some sort of drive in the character in this patch you've got going on. Is that the module itself, or is it something else?
No, it's the module itself. It's
at higher levels, does it drive a little bit, get a little sort of...
You get it, again, that will be to do with the inclusion of the width of how many of the harmonics are actually present at the time. So you've got to be quite careful with that. You can really drive it, really overload it really with the width control. But yeah, it's got loads of kind of bottom end and lots of grit you can have with it. But then, like I say, you can completely cut that out and just focus on the top end if you want.
Yeah. So is it a case of as these levels get higher up that those signs do just square off a little bit as well?
I guess so. I'm not really kind of explored doing that with it per se, as it were, trying to get this kind of great thing. But it's just being able to have that kind of control. You've always got to kind of watch how many you are going to kind of include within that width.
Yeah.
I've got nearly everything on there under CV control from LFOs. So they're just kind of moving up and down throughout that sort of spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, people will hear this when they listen. Again, all the links will be in the description. But it could be the MMG that's got the input a little high, or it could be the dual delay from Modcam. But there's a little bit of sort of, again, it sounds like a negative thing, but clipping in a sort of nice analog rounding off kind of thick way that I think not just the harmonics that I'm hearing. It sounds like something's just got a nice bit of drive somewhere, and it sounds like it's not a very verbose thing to do, to just give you that bit of colour at the top.
Yeah, I noticed that it had that the first time I played with it. It wasn't like an excessive amount, and it doesn't sound like anything's getting squared off or purposefully saturated. But it's just that like if you had all the faders up, or if you're just listening to one harmonic that happens to be a strong one, it kind of just has a tiny bit of drive to it.
Well, that's why it's difficult to pin down. But I would say it is that kind of sound of it. It doesn't always kind of distort, but basically because I've got lots of things under CV control there, including the MMG, just at certain points when harmonics hit, you're dead right. It's gonna have that little bit more drive. So again, it was in my usual style, it was completely autonomous. After I'd set it up, it just played itself.
Yeah.
So, so you are going to get some kind of clashes of kind of free.
That's what it is.
But that's why I like it. I absolutely love it. You can obviously rein that in more by not giving it as extreme CV control.
Yeah. So then there's I bring the other one up. There's also a patch, Harmonic Scan. How's that sort of different? What's the 2 approaches you were going for?
The other one was I was using more in the previous patch. I was using kind of 2 sets of sequences really. One of the sequences was to sequence up and down through the harmonics, and then the the Rene was then just choosing the root note of that.
Yeah, I really like that. That was one thing I've got sort of written down in these notes in front of me, that you can hear the root note change more obviously.
Yeah.
But it almost sounds in a similar way to what James did with layering out these different outs and processing from the DPO.
Yeah.
It's got two sequences going. It almost sounds duophonic, where you've got one low note that the Rene is changing, and then there's something else moving on top that's related but more independent.
Well, yeah, that's exactly why I kind of chose to do that with the harmonic oscillator, is just so you could hear almost the two sides of it, for want of a better description. In the way that you're listening to the root note, you think, well, why don't you just kind of sequence that? Well, I wanted that to be kind of steady and then sequence the harmonics. You know, just kind of show that, you know, those two things that it can potentially do.
Yeah, it was a fantastic example. And yeah, it's interesting how much keeping a root note steady and changing what ends up being harmonics or upper intervals around, like, anchors a sound while giving it lots of movement. Whereas if you just move the fundamental with it, it's almost like too much movement. You lose this sort of, you know, anchor point, and it becomes, you know, rather than two voices doing some sort of counterpoint, it just sounds like a large, you know, big voice single arpeggio or something.
Yeah,
that was exactly the kind of thing I was going for. It was just that, just to kind of, you know, because, you know, when we were talking about this, what we want to kind of show is what's unique in the analog oscillator world, where this is pretty much it, really. And I have a couple of things that we are probably going to go on to mention, but it is such a big change. I mean, you've got one too, Greg, haven't you, as well?
Yeah.
You know,
yeah, that's pretty much why I got it. It's just so different than everything else. It's there's nothing else will really do what it does. And it was my kind of introduction to additive synthesis, so I've learned a lot from it as well.
Yeah.
So what sort of role is it fulfilling in your setup, Greg?
I use it a lot for, as the guys say, it kind of does arpeggio type stuff. It does that really well. If you ping it with different length gates, if you can set up a few different length gates and ping the different inputs on it, it's really interesting. You get some arpeggiated type, low pass gate type stuff.
Oh, interesting.
That's really nice. The Harmonic Scan as well, if you put that into a big reverb, you make some really nice pads as well.
Well, you just basically do that, walk away, and just record it, because it just sounds fantastic. It's just an instant kind of wonderful drone machine doing that. And again, just like, you know, throwing any modulation source into those inputs that are going to fade in and out those harmonics. Again, that's a really neat trick. You know, if you've got plenty of LFOs or other, you know, sample and holds or whatever, it's just really just bringing those in. And again, just I often do that, and I just don't change the root note.
Yeah.
You just move, like, you know, like James was saying, I just move the harmonics around that central pin, as it were, and that's just a really great, really sort of satisfying thing to do.
Well, it then serves the purpose of what an original drone was in terms of musical tones, that just underpins the whole piece.
Yeah.
One thing I remember when I was playing with my friends one is that the sliders sort of take priority over any of the modulation, which I thought was fantastic. So, like, if you were to put the slider all the way up, it's going to stay all the way up. I guess maybe if you feed it a negative voltage, it'll go down, maybe. But we were just using envelopes in the sequencer, and it was like, oh, this is great. You could just hold the fundamental wide open and modulate all the ones above that. And it was just little touches like that. He seems to put a lot of really nice little touches in all those modules.
Yeah, it may not be for everyone, because certainly it's not a one-trick pony by any means. It's a wonderful, wonderful experience having one. But I think maybe that's what some people may be put off by, thinking, well, it just does this and harmonics go up and down, that's the end of it.
I kind of thought that too until I got my hands on it. It was like, you know, I heard demos of it, and I had played with one for, you know, maybe like 5 minutes when it had first come out, and I was kind of like, oh, okay, it does that. But one of those things that I've learned is like, yeah, I got to stop just going, oh, yeah, it does that. They always have something they do more than that once you dive in deep.
Well, it must be amazing for drums. If you've enough envelopes to throw, you know, the lower ones have a slightly longer envelope, the top ones have a slightly faster one, the scans may be moving quite quickly. More complex, like real sort of acoustic tom sounds must be.
Can get those stuff out of it, yeah.
Yeah, it must be really, in a similar way, and we'll come on to this, that like the Akemie's Castle is an amazing drone machine, but it's really good for drums as well. I think that all that stuff is just so wide open that it's quite easy to do a lot of things with it, even though it might seemingly do one thing well to start with.
Yeah, I remember it sounded very good at low frequencies. Low frequencies, and I was just doing it manually, like pulling the sliders up and down really fast, like you might do with some envelopes. And while it didn't sound exactly like, you know, pinging a bandpass filter at those different frequencies, it had a similar, you know, timbre to that, and that was really cool too.
Yeah, cool. Well, we'll move on to digital. Should we start with wavetables? I think
Sure.
the first thing that comes to my mind with wavetables, especially for ultra smooth, is the E350 Morphic Terrarium from Synthesis Tech. I don't know if it's the order of the wavetables, which is often as important, if not more important, than the actual smoothing algorithm itself. If you were going to go from sine to saw wave and maybe not go sine triangle saw wave, to stick with the analog waves, that might not be as smooth as something else. But that seems to be the smoothest wavetable out there.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good example of like a curated and very carefully chosen and mapped out wavetables. Because I mean, it was years ago now, but I remember when Paul was working on that, he came to one of the Analog Bay Area meetups and was showing it off and talked a lot about that, like how they were chosen and how they were set up in the sequence to go, you know, brighter as you increased, and like modulation, the sound of modulation depth as you changed the, I think it was the Z-axis or something. And that always stuck with me, and hearing how people were like, oh yeah, this one's really, really smooth, it must be somehow more special than just the white wavetables. But yeah, once you find the right wavetables and you're modulating through them the right way, you get those very like dulcet, beautiful sounding tones.
Yeah, and a very, to sort of just play into that, this isn't about analog or digital, a very analog, as it were, experience. Just 6 knobs, 2 switches, and but like I said, it's I think a very curated experience. That again doesn't mean it's limited, because there's lots of areas in there where you can find sort of really fat, growly stuff, or even analog saw wave based shit, you sort of typical into a low pass filter type thing. There's lots of glassy and organ-like tones as it moves through the harmonic series. The first bank actually will be very similar to the harmonic oscillator. The first, I don't know if it's 8 waves or more, go up the harmonic series. So that'll be a little bit like this sort of idea of scanning up and down the verbos, but within a wavetable.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's lots of other stuff out there, some with quite different characters. The Erica Sims one, for a new one, seems to be really smooth from the demos.
Sounds amazing.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, it seems it's got more banks with less waves in, I think. So you've got like a really vocal bank with all the sort of formants in there.
Those sound particularly good, don't they? I really do like those.
Yeah, it's got a sub-oscillator on it that tracks the normal wave shape as opposed to just being sort of a square wave. It's got a bit crusher on it as well. Let's pull it up so people can have a look. So again, a very different experience, but that seemed to come really close to these sort of really glassy, smooth, vocal-like shapes. Let's pull an image up. I don't know, has anyone managed to get their hands on one yet, or is it video?
I've just watched the videos like you, Ben, and it's just, I was really kind of blown away by how smooth that, you know, everyone talks about the E350 being super smooth. Well, this is just as smooth in my opinion.
Oh, wow.
With the option to go harsher if you want.
Yeah,
I think.
exactly.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it seemed to be, again, it'll be a different experience, but it seems to be the closest to that sort of E350 smoothness.
but it's different enough for you to have them side by side in a rack. Like we were talking about with the, like with the DPO, etc.
Yeah.
Easily have those together, and it wouldn't be, oh well, I'll just have to sell this one because this is like, it's like, no, these are enough of a difference.
Oh yeah, I think having the sub on there as well that moves with the other wave is a cool feature. I mean, you could argue that if you had two and the sub was separate, they could move independently, but I mean, this is what, 12 HP, 14 HP or something, it looks like. Yeah, I certainly want to try one. I mean, they also win the world's smallest oscillator. Well, no, the Eon from Qubit wins the world's but the smallest wavetable with their 3 HP Pico wavetable.
Which sounds brilliant too.
It blew us away at Super Booth, didn't it? That tiny little oscillator. That goes down into LFO range as well. Gives you a lot of wavetable LFO shapes.
Right.
That's always really cool to see when people do that, because I think especially in the modular world, it's a lot more interesting to see very unusual LFO wave shapes. You can get sine and triangle and whatever almost anywhere, but to get these I always liked that on the Piston Honda. It was these very unusual LFO shapes. Sometimes you can't really end up using them, but they're really fun to experiment with. And I got a lot of ideas to kind of recreate them, but like slower, like even slower shapes, by listening to a lot of the LFOs on the Piston Honda.
Even the ones that are kind of really complex and odd, I've always found them kind of useful for just literally just doing simple duties like opening and closing filters. They don't have to kind of rely on time-based things. It'll just, just randomly almost open and close things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's that utility thing again, and even if they're quite harsh and square-edged, if you can glue it out enough so it sort of just drifts a little bit more, you can use it for anything really. Or if it really has to be dead set with some sort of other timing, take these random, odd, all over spiky, weird shapes and just run them through a sample and hold, clocked fairly fast.
Yeah.
It'll seem like some random step that's at least repeatable with a more random LFO shape.
Yeah, I've used that trick a few times. It kind of does gives it like a pseudo timing effect, doesn't it? Because it's not always going to be there, but because that clock of the sample and hold is the timing, you kind of get chunks, don't you, where it is.
Yeah. You mentioned the Piston Honda, James. That seems more gnarly and a bit more gritty, and
I think that's
yes,
quite deliberate with
I would say most of the banks are that way, and I think it's bank 2 is much more in the pretty FM tone range, so it can definitely do both. But the emphasis, I think, is getting a little more gritty and fuzzy, especially the fact that you have a control dedicated to reducing smoothing. There's a button there to reduce the smoothing of the actual audio output too. I used to usually run with it on, so there's more smoothing, but depending on what I was doing, I would turn the smoothing off. The Mark II is such an amazing improvement on the Mark I, just simply because you can use a external input and the internal oscillator at the same time, which was like a either or on the Mark I, as well as having every bank on a slider. On the Mark I, on boot, you could choose 2 ROMs. And then there was like a button or a gate input to switch between the A or the B ROM, whereas here you have every ROM on a slider. And that was actually a really nice design with the 3 sliders, because there's so many individual waves that traversing them wasn't always easy either with just 2. So just having the 3 sliders, you can quickly get back in the readout of the 3 digits. It's kind of easy to remember, like, oh, these are the ones that I really like the sound of. But I always really liked the buzziness of that, even though I don't usually make really aggressive sounds. But when you run those things with the high sort of frequency sizzle and buzziness through low pass gates and you ping them, it just has this amazing, very real acoustic sound to it. I think all the Rene 101, 201, whatever videos that I did, they were all Piston Honda through the QMMG at the time. And I always get people commenting and emailing, like, how did you make that sound? And it's like, oh, it's just some wavetable of the piston Honda through an Optimix or a low-pass gate.
Well, I like that idea of it almost sounding real. I mean, if you really snap or play like slap and pop on a bass, that initial twang is so short-lived when you really pluck a string, and it flaps back down on the fretboard. And I think something like the Optimix just lets enough of that through for it to just somehow seem more organic, for the want of a better word. So yeah, that makes sense that these sort of rich, I don't know if it's aliasing or noise or just having something in the top that will just hit right at the start of the note.
Yeah, it was really good through resonant bandpass filters too, like the Res 4. I really need to try it through the Twin Peak or maybe the 4MS Spectrum Multiband, but where you have, I mean, almost in similar vein as like the Verbos, where you have this fundamental, lot of low frequency, but you also have this high frequency content, which may be closer to noise, maybe closer to an upper harmonic or whatever. But being able to scan and select those yielded some really cool tones too. So I always kind of liked the buzziness, dirty, aliasing kind of things that the piston Honda could do. I mean, sometimes it was like, oh, I just can't use that for the sound I'm thinking of. But other times it was like, oh, I can get all these sounds out of that with the help of a couple other modules that I wouldn't have otherwise thought to get or use. Yeah.
I mean, you've got the piston Honda mat too, Greg, right?
Yeah. I think James's video on it. James did a recent video on it. That's really, really good.
Oh, thanks.
To mention probably what's my favorite thing on it as well, which is the wave shaping. When you send something into it, you're essentially making a wavetable oscillator out of anything.
Yes.
And then being able to use the internal mode in LFO mode, send that back into it, while CVing your waves through your wavetables, and relate it then as well, which is really,
it's super really cool. And the fact that like most wavetable oscillators internally are using some kind of your downward ramping or upward ramping saw to generate the sound. When you feed it an external signal that isn't that, it's a sine wave or even has like a negative swing, you get very different sounds out of just the same table. And that was always cool, just to mix the two, like take the internal out and then feed a triangle or a sine into the external that's maybe an octave lower or something, and blend those two together, and it would create an even bigger sound.
You mentioned the gain knob as well. When you turn that gain knob, it's like an extra bit of wave shaping. You get this slight distortion, saturation as you turn it at a certain point.
Yeah, because at some point you start to like square off the input, and it wraps around to another point on the data table, so it shapes it even further.
It's Ben mentions them a lot. It's quite similar to a CP3 mixer.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone needs a little CP3 mixer. But yeah, no, I like that idea that if it's doing it, I didn't realize it did that it does it on the input, so you're wrapping round to a different point in the wavetable.
Yeah, I mean, if I understand it right, it's probably not too different than like some wave shapers have like a threshold or a bias or something. And that's what you're adjusting that changes when it folds down. So my understanding of that gain control on the front is you're basically doing something similar. You're offsetting the input audio to where it's going to be out of the range of the data table, so it wraps it around the bottom or folds it down.
I thought that would have been an output thing, just a little bit of clipping on the output or something. That's interesting that it's not.
Yeah, it's just for the external input. And it's sort of one of those things where initially you're like, oh, that seems weird to have this big, you have manual control, a CV input, and all this for the external in. But that's where, to me, that's where that module like really shines, is the external input. And the bonus is the fact that there's an internal oscillator that can go into LFO mode. Yeah. I always looked at it as like a giant, not giant, but a big digital wave shaper.
Yeah. Well, you sort of get in like the Richter and Maleko Megawave or the Geiger counter. They're essentially that without, like you said, like an internal saw. to generate sound. You have to.
Yeah, exactly.
You sort of getting both in one, which is really cool. Is anybody using wavetables when they're in sort of macro oscillators like braids or a shapeshifter? I tend not to, funnily. I mean, braids has got some great wavetable modes, some really gorgeous wavetables. But I like that sort. For me, I really like that curated experience of like the E350, which sort of validates having both. I mean, I use the wavetables in braids, but not as much as I imagine I would if I had the Erica one we mentioned, or Piston Honda, or the E350. Does anyone have braids, shapeshifter, any of those sort of more?
Yeah, I have both. I agree with what you've just said, Ben. Actually, I don't particularly use them because I have the E350 as well. You know, so it's kind of again, I'm going to each one for the strengths, really.
Yeah. So what sort of things are you tending to go for with braids? And well, braids is called a macro oscillator, which I like the idea of that as the name, and the shapeshifter. Even more so, I think. It's got wave folding. Has that got its own modulation?
Yeah, the modulation on that is just great. You know, you can use, well, you've just got all sorts of different routines of the FM as well. I mean, I nearly all. I hate to say I do one thing with an oscillator or a filter. I don't, but mine's nearly always permanently stuck in chord mode. I just love the chord mode in shapeshifter.
Yeah.
That's why I go to for that. I really like it.
Yeah. I tend to use braids a lot for its noise modes. Having the clock noise, the granular noise, the sort of granular cloud noise stuff.
Yeah.
When I want noise for something, be it to just background noise in a patch through some reverb or some drums, it's so quick to dial it in. It's for anything else, I think, for braids. I think that's the sort of, and it sits in a mix really well, braids. I don't know what it is or why, and that's maybe not an exciting, this is the biggest, most sort of ballsy low-end bass oscillator, but it just seems to sit really well against both software and multi-track of the modular, with very little doing to it. I'm sort of glad that some of the modes aren't the biggest, beefiest.
Yeah, exactly. I really like the ring mod on it as well.
Yeah.
You know, I find that really usable on that. You can do all sorts with that.
I didn't know it had a whole flavor of noises. I'm really interested to find some demos of that.
Yeah, there's I did something on it for future music, and I'll send you the video. But just
okay, cool.
So much, I literally went, here's this mode with a sequence. Here's went through every single mode. So it's not the most in-depth thing, but there's an example of all the different modes. It takes a while to get through. It's also got all those Casio sort of fake filter model stuff in there, like the CZ Peak.
Yeah.
They're quite cool. They get really resonant, like the original CZ stuff does, and a little whistly maybe in the top end sometimes, but they sound really good. Also, I like the wave folder in that, the fold mode, more than most other wave folders that I've heard. A really good job for me. That really stands out. And also the FM. There's a normal FM mode. There's one that's got a predetermined feedback path in it, and there's a more unstable FM as well. And they're all really good because being digital, not that fundamental never drifts anywhere, which for me is perfect. I want to be, as you were saying, James, with the DPO, really push that FM depth. And I like that I never have to sort of, as the depth goes up, try and fine-tune it back.
Try and retune it again. Yeah.
Yeah, especially if it's having a bigger system, having multiple things running, and that's maybe one layer of 2 or 3 parts.
Yeah, and there's some levels of FM where especially at a very high frequency modulation, that even if you had perfectly stable tuning, that analog just doesn't seem to do as well. Like it dulls out, it rounds off, or the sidebands just aren't as present. There's definitely like analog FM has it's sort of like place, and I really like it. But there's tones of digital FM that's just like there's no point trying to do it in analog, in my opinion.
No, I mean, has anyone tried we checked out at Super Booth, Matthew, the Leaf Audio noise to brain adapter. Has anyone seen that one?
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Trying to find a picture for that one to pull up. I've been playing around with that. That's something I've got a video coming of, and it's got like a Nintendo 8-bit octave arpeggio mode in.
Oh really? Yeah.
Doesn't work for most things, obviously, but I'm a real sucker for that.
Oh yeah.
You know, and that it sounds great, but it's also got a lot of. I'll find a picture in a second, but it's got like a cluster trigger mode where you can. It's almost like a burst generator. You can pick the amount of bursts, how fast they come. So it's like a bouncing ball or the opposite of a bouncing ball. You know, really fast that then slows down, and the curve that seems to do a lot of sort of CV type tricks as well that I've not seen on other audios. Other oscillators, not audios.
Is that for like trills and like very quick arpeggios and stuff like that? Where it kind of, you know, makes it sound like a chord, but it's really like 4 notes just played in sequence really fast?
Well, it sends them out as triggers, so it's actually then like CV to go elsewhere. I found the picture there.
Oh, okay.
So you've
that's pretty cool looking.
Yeah, it's another Hannes Pasqualini paper noise job that does all the mutable and hex inverter, and he helped them out with the graphics for that. But I'll scroll down, you can see all these different modes it's got, and it's one of those. I know it's not for everyone looking at menus and modes and things, but manuals. This trigger cluster down at the bottom, and it creates a cluster of triggers that you sort of one-shot put a gate in, and you can have the sort of growth, the amount of these triggers, the speed at which they re-trigger after each other.
Oh, interesting.
It's almost just like a normal trigger burst generator. And you've got the switcher, the trigger clouds. It does some really cool FM stuff. It's just very different.
It looks it, doesn't it? It's really good.
Well, the chip, like I said, I'm a bit of a sucker for the chip tune thing every now and then. You know, I do like that. But there's, you know, you get the sub out on all the stuff. The PWM sounds great. It's all this sort of cluster stuff that it does. That
I'm really interested in that part of it.
Looks cool. Are there any audio demos of this out now, Ben?
They've got, in fact, on that page, I'll share it again. This is on their website, leaf-audio.com. Yeah, there's some soundtrack there. They've got some video stuff already. I'll have a video coming soon. They've got quite a lot going. It's DIY and assembled. But I really like the idea of that, you know, thinking that these triggers and down under audio rate, this sort of one-shot burst generation is almost like, I guess, having it on that edge of LFO audio range and just getting some of them through on a VCA almost. It's a nice, it's quite a unique angle, I thought, having a sort of generator. You know, listening to that, it just clicks. You can hear it just like if you were listening to a slow LFO. You can't hear it per se. But it's got all sorts of noise modes with sample and hold and jitter built in, and really cool when I've been playing with it. It's sort of on the line of maybe not a full voice, but we'll get on sort of full voices and things. We mentioned dual oscillators to sort of move on. Anybody using digital dual oscillators? Hertz Donut, for example?
I don't have the Hertz Donut anymore, but for a while I used it a lot. And actually kind of similarly to how I used the DPO, where some of it was FM, and then maybe a third of the time I was using it like 2 independent oscillators. I remember really liking the wave shaping on that. It was obviously a very distinct tone, but it sounded really good. And there was a lot of really interesting stuff with the bad, terrible, worse. I forget the names for the tracking modes.
Yeah, where it can actually track deliberately sloppy.
Yeah, especially, and once you did like cross FM between the two, you could get these very, I would not call them musical, but very like interesting textures and tones and sort of evolving things from that.
Yeah, kind of like harsher ring mod. It gets quite atonal and a little more dissonant.
Yeah,
And
that satisfied a lot of the like FM sounds that Analogue doesn't do very well for me when I was playing around with those a lot. I could get those out of the Hertz donut, and still at the same time, like I didn't feel like I had to have analog oscillators as well. Like it didn't feel like, oh, that's just for digital FM or whatever. It did both duties for me, which I always really liked.
Yeah. What about the Loquelic Arps? That's one of my favorite oscillators of any kind. I absolutely.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I'll second that.
Super harsh in all the best ways. Can do soft. If you
really can.
Leave the folding down and get some of the damping in. It can do loads of soft, gorgeous tones, but it just does harsh so well. It's just begging to be filthy.
I think it's probably one of the best oscillators out there that responds to CV. It begs to be modulated. It really does. Just like to say, it's sort of diminutive size and everything. It's just, you just spend 5 minutes on it and you go, wow, I can't believe the sound palette that this is capable of. But then when you introduce CV to those bits and just gently modulating those parameters, you just get such a wide range of sounds.
Yeah. The only thing it falls down with, and I've probably said this before because it's a personal bugbear, is that as soon as you plug a cable in, those manual positions and all the knobs become CV attenuators. And lots of other modules do it. I don't want to sort of...
Yeah. There's a reason behind it, isn't there?
Yeah, it's two ways of thinking. For me, if I've set all the knobs where I want them and I want to add a little bit of CV, I don't want that knob to change when I plug a cable in. It means having to get a mixer and an offset generator to do the same thing as if the knob just stayed as its static value. But I appreciate that means not using CV attenuators for those that want to go from the low value and then up.
Yeah.
There's two ways of thinking. That's my only criticism of that thing. I absolutely love it. I tried to, in another patch example, we've got the Loquelic Arps. Simple arpeggio playing. I tried to take it through all the different sounds, just triggering a VCA going through. Went through the 3 different modes, the sort of vocal stuff, summation, and the phase distortion, and then just use sample and hold. Free sample and hold in various CV ins, or the pitch of the second oscillator modulating the first. So in that patch example, I tried to take it through as much of the sort of tonal range that I could get through in a few minutes.
Yeah, that seemed like a big range. I feel like I missed the bus, and I'm like one of the only people that doesn't have one of those modules. So that was a really good demo. There was parts where I was like, I don't like that as much, but then there was other tones. I was like, wow, that sounds incredible.
That's just what it's all about. It really is. I haven't really found anything on it that I haven't particularly liked, but it is such a powerful, just packs a punch.
Yeah.
That's, if it's pulling things out. Yeah, get one, Greg.
Yeah. I got been listening to Matthew waxing lyrical about it for a few months.
Well, it's got such a wide, depending on what kind of music you're into generating as well. You can just do, completely amazing rhythmic kind of things with it, but you can completely drone out and do everything like that with it as well. It's got it's not just for, oh yeah, that's the techno module, get that. It's just, you can do it.
I had a session making drums on it, just running it into a low pass gate with one envelope for the low pass gate and the same envelope for pitch, just for like a general kick drum type thing, and put lots of random voltage in. And I think that's one of those sound diary videos that's just audio that I do. Again, I'll find that and link it underneath. But just there's loads of these great little percussive blips and stuff as well. And
I've been to a couple performances, and I've gone up to someone afterwards and said, like, hey, what was doing the, fill in the drum sound here? And it was always the Loquelic.
Mm.
Yeah, just really, really amazing. Definitely, I think, favourite oscillator of any kind at the minute for most things. But again, it's that dual oscillator thing and it being really stable because it's digital. You never, and I deliberately use random CV in that arpeggio demo that it might take it to places some people don't like, but that's just because it was wide range, random CV, as opposed to me trying to rein it into certain styles. But I think they're all in there.
Did the two oscillators on that like interact at all? Like, did they FM each other or like modulate the other?
Controlled by the morph and the damp knobs.
Oh, okay.
Sort of depths of the thing. There's always a wave folder, and then the morphing and the dampening changes. What it's doing dependent on the mode. One of them is just a phase distortion mode.
You've got the switch as well, haven't you? The A, B, and both, haven't you?
Yeah, for which you can choose whether the oscillator A or B is the sort of master or the slave, or that they both track. So it's really easy to get it really stable and musical as well. Again, I'll pull a picture up of this one before we move on. Yeah, so you've always got the fold. That's always sort of present in each of the modes. And then the switch at the top has this VO algorithm, and then summation, synthesis, and phase modulation. But super wide ranging. Really top end, glassy harsh stuff's really nice. Really smooth, round, sort of bottom end.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. It really does excel in either ends, doesn't it? It really, you can go right up there into those bell metallic sounds and really low down as well.
Yeah. So I think that's sort of a personal honourable mention, as it were. I think it's the size as well. I mean, it's like about the AFG, opposite end of the spectrum, back to just more basic analog. I absolutely love that thing, but it's pretty huge.
Yeah, it's a beast.
Whereas I think it's the size of it and what it's packing in the size that it makes it that sort of no-brainer to just have it in a single row skiff or a big system or little briefcase performance setup. That's probably the power of it.
Man, one thing mentioning on the AFG, because I had it out last week, that I wish more manufacturers do. I'm just curious what your guys' thought is I love on that one that the coarse knob is the smaller one and the fine is the larger one.
Right.
So you actually have like more control over kind of manually drifting it in and out and things like that. I always wish that like the coarse one, the one I only touch once when I'm tuning it, were kind of out of the way and I had a bigger control knob for.
Yeah, I think I'd edge that way as well. For the fine, you want a bit of grab and really just get it dead in. I think I'd edge that way. I see, to playing devil's advocate, and I like both sides. I like grabbing a coarse knob and just going right one. That's fun as well. So I sort of get both.
The fact is, but then in a way, you do need more control over a fine, don't you? Them little plastic, skinny potentiometers, and you're just trying to dial in a small move, and it's like, whoa, that's too much. Yeah.
That's my thing with the DPO. That's like the one thing that I wish I could change is just reverse those knobs and have the little one be the coarse. And I mean, it would be harder to kind of get the coarse where you need it, but they just sound so good if you just drift them a little bit, and it's so hard to do that with the little one, especially if you're trying to do it, live and you're trying to worry about everything else. And
I think the AFG is the only one I've come across that does that.
Yeah, that's the only one I can think of. And I remember as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, that's great. I love that one. I'm always kind of like a sucker, too, for panels that have different size knobs. That's one of the reasons why I think I end up with a lot of make noise stuff is I really love stuff that has attenuators or attenuverters for as many of the inputs as possible and different size knobs. It just works better with my brain. Either it's just like being visually able to immediately see, oh, right, that's that one knob, or it kind of influences importance too. Like, oh, that's the bigger one is the kind of more important one.
You've got it in like this sort of hierarchy thing. That's weird because that's what I actually did with the AFG. I replaced the knobs and put different size ones on there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Just for that reason. But do you know any other Ben that have got that bias the other way around?
That's the only I can think of.
Looking at stuff, the AGH stuff has the octave switching on the big knob, which is cool as a sort of playable, and it's really
totally.
It's really accurate octave switching as well. So you can feel confident in going up for it.
Yeah, like that. It's going to be there.
I was there. I just looked at it. The Richter oscillator too is the same.
Oh, it is.
The big one.
I can't think of any others. I mean, it's common on a filter, isn't it, that the cutoff is the big knob on the filter?
Yeah. The Macbeth. I don't actually have one, but is the big knob on the Macbeth?
Yeah, I think so, actually, yeah. Good
that
point.
Could be fine.
The Erica Sims Black Vari-Shape VCO, which is a superb analog oscillator that does all the mixing on board. You've got inverted controls for the triangle, square, and the saw, and then a sub as well. So that's super fun just to jam on the whole thing without needing a mixer. But that's got an octave switch, but the big knob is then the fine control. It's fairly wide ranging, but it's it's big enough that it's really easy just to rein it in to exactly where you want. I can't think of any others. They tend to be the coarse ones, the big one, like I said, and then even a mini pot for fine tune, which isn't that helpful. The DivKid one's got a big knob for fine tune, but again, that's an octave switcher next to it.
Yeah.
But again, I like that layout of the cutoff, the fine tune, and the octave switch are big, and then pulse width, PWM, FM depth are all small. I like that. We'll lead it on to, we mentioned analog additive synthesis, where you've got amplitude control over harmonics. The only other thing I can think of, and it's digital, is the tELHARMONIC.
Oh, yeah.
That's a bank of sine. I don't have one, but that's a bank of sine waves in one or more of the modes, as far as I know.
Yeah.
We've got a couple of examples from that. We'll start with yours, James. The tELHARMONIC Church. It's got a nice sort of organ, nice organ-like quality to it. So what's going on with that one? It's sort of again, you've done that similar thing, same thing as the previous one, where you've managed to get a lot of different tones out of it.
Yeah, that kind of, I think, ends up being my thing. I sort of realized after the fact that I did that on accident in both examples, but probably with the tELHARMONIC even more so than the DPO, I really love using all three outputs at the same time, especially because the harmonic and the phase outputs are kind of balanced so that centroid and flux do timbrally opposite things for each output. So even if you're mixing them together, it's not like if you were to think of centroid as a filter, it's almost like you have two filters moving in opposite directions on one knob for each output.
The other gets dull and vice versa.
Yeah, so they blend really nicely together. And I think this is very similar to, it's one of the patches from the manual. I can't remember if it's called Solar Winds or something else, but basically you have a gate locking different harmonics and a random voltage sweeping centroid up. So on a harmonic output, as centroid narrows in on some amount of harmonics, it just locks it there, which is what that H-lock does. So you'll keep hearing that as centroid moves somewhere else, so it kind of layers the harmonics.
So it's almost what Matthew did, where you've got almost a duophonic, one thing will drone and another thing will move.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just kind of like stamping those harmonics in kind of randomly. And if you turn flux all the way down, which is the output of, I think it's the sum output of two envelopes on the maths, as flux goes all the way down, all those harmonic locks are reset. And then as flux goes back up, it sort of starts all over again. So you have this sort of semi-random locking of different harmonics on the H out, and then the phase output is shifting as flux and centroid are shifting too. So you kind of get this extra movement for free out of that output.
And as you mix those outs, does that phase interfere with the other outputs and you get cancellations and peaks and troughs in the waves, or?
You might a tiny bit, but not in a very extreme noticeable sense. They're kind of balanced well, so as you mix them together, they kind of complement.
Right. And I guess they're quite different. Are they quite different sounding outputs as well?
Yeah. The phase output is somewhat similar to like the old Casio phase distortion. But I think this is phase modulation, and I don't know technically enough how to explain what's different, but it definitely sounds more. That one to me sounds more like kind of like a guitar kind of esque timbre, whereas the harmonic sounds much more like an organ. If that's probably the most generic I could explain how the two outputs sound. And then the noise output, the noise timbre changes with flux as well. So I think I'm just sending the noise through the Optimix, and that's just getting struck. So you get this like, kind of tapping sound, but that tapping sound evolves because flux is changing too. So that's one of my favorite things with using all these three outputs is whatever modulation you're sending to centroid and flux, it's affecting all three outputs to a pretty significant degree.
Yeah, cool. We'll get into it. Something I wanted to mention, because there's two modules, not just keyboard sims, that do it differently. Phase modulation and phase distortion, and how they're different. It's something I've noted down, and we'll mention it as we move on. But while we're on the tELHARMONIC, we've also got Matthew's patch. And you're using the shift register, Matthew, if I remember right.
Yeah, it's in the tELHARMONIC's in the shift register mode. But what happens here is that when the D gate input receives A gate, that's when it updates the shift register, as it were. So it passes on the information to the next stage. So you can just do classic, almost like arpeggiated lines with it. In this is going for more of a West Coast kind of random sound here. But you just get these really interesting. So you just basically holds a stage, a tone, and then pass it on. It's like a 3-step shift register.
How many stages does it have to the shift register?
3.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're getting this sort of classic, like I said, arpeggio trio type thing.
I mean, you're not really hearing it as obvious in this patch because you're not getting a steady gate. We've got random gates happening here from the Quadra.
So is it quite a rich output? Looking at the filter, or the filter, is that just in the feedback path or of the delay? Is it quite rich, or is it quite sine-like still, like sort of additive sine?
Yeah, it's still pretty like that. Yeah, it's not in the feedback path so much. The filter's not behaving normally in inverted commas, as it were. But yeah, the kind of the gates are happening all from the Quadra, and then basically again a little bit like what James has done. I put the noise back in as well there, just to kind of thicken it up. And what's good about, I mean, it may sound obvious, but not always, I guess, that the noise is pitched. So if it goes up and down in pitch, so does the noise. Yeah.
And is that kind of like bandpass coloured noise, or is it clocked noise where really low down you get that like Atari explosion?
It's actually like two or three sine waves that are like heavily modulated with something, so it like approaches the noise tone, but it's not like full band noise that's then filtered.
Yeah, right. That's why the pitches are shifting. That's similar.
Yeah,
it's really useful. Really, of all the kind of other noise generating modules that I have, it's definitely worthy of another mention. Just the way that it does it and approaches it.
Well, and if you turn, I think it's fluxed all the way up. It basically approaches like a really wavery sine wave. It almost sounds like kind of like a theremin or something.
Yeah.
So you can go all the way from kind of a wave or sine wave to what sounds like pink noise, I think, with flux all the way open. If you get the pitch right, it kind of sounds like pink noise.
I think it really is. I think where they've designed it is really well. I think that the choice of those three outputs of those kind of noises, I think, work really well together. They're not kind of completely extreme from each other, but again, when we talk, I can't remember who mentioned it earlier about curated kind of sounds. They really do work well together as a mixture.
Yeah, it sounds like how the 808 symbols and things are 6 square waves all cross-modulated and ring modulated together, and that creates that typical drum machine cymbal sound that isn't just white noise. You can hear that it's tonal in some way. Mark Verbos told us about that in episode 4, which again we'll have to plow all these links underneath.
That was a great episode too, by the way.
Yeah, well, any of that, I think talking about the harmonic oscillator being unique, if anyone wants a look at sort of Mark's ideas and where he's coming from, that was an amazing insight into him and his random sampling module and random in general. That was the topic. He was really cool. We met him at Super Booth as well, which is how that episode ended up happening. So yeah, speaking of phase modulation and phase distortion, that's sort of leading us to the sort of back end of his notes. We've got the sort of FM, digital FM and phase distortion stuff. Things with like the Yamaha DX7, which is known as being FM, was actually phase modulation, not frequency modulation. If it's the difference between the two, as I understand it, is that if it's phase modulation, they can be at different pitches. You know, you can modulate an octave above and phase modulate the main carrier, if you like. Phase distortion, which is what the Casio CZ series did, are all at the same pitch. And the sort of module equivalent of the two approaches, the sort of DX Yamaha thing and the Casio CZ, you've got Akemie's Castle for Yamaha FM, that's actually phase modulation, and that's new old stock Yamaha chips, so it's as authentic as you're going to get. And then the phase distortion thing is the PDO from WMD, where you've got 4 oscillators that all share the same core pitch that you can't change, which is still incredibly powerful, but phase modulation is the pitch difference, phase distortion, they're all locked same. We'll start with the FM stuff and Akemie's Castle. You've an example or two for us, Greg, for that one. So what's it doing for you? Has it become your chord machine? Are you using it for drums or?
I'm using it for both. It's pretty much what I got it for, and what I thought I was going to use it for mostly was those DX7 type chords, which it will do, and it does really well. But it's become a drum module since then.
Well, I'll pull your patch example up. Well, I think the beauty of it is that it's that DX controllable. The root note never goes anywhere. You get in this what's known as FM but phase modulation sound.
I mean, we said it earlier. It's one module. If you had to pick a few modules to do what this is doing, you'd fill a whole rack. So it's one module that just makes it easy.
Well, it's just got everything on knobs. It's 4 operators, so it's slightly more limited than a DX7, which I think was that 6 or 8? Certainly more than 4 on the DX7. But you get a hell of a lot out of the thing. You've got the A and the B oscillator and the different algorithms for how the 4 operators work for the A and the B. And the operators, for those that haven't heard that terminology, essentially is just 4 oscillators.
Yeah.
But an operator in that sort of Yamaha FM world is essentially an oscillator and a VCA. So you've got all that control. You've got the wave, the harmonic multiplication. You can sort of scan up the harmonics with a multiply, and then a level control on all 4 of the operators with CV in for all of them, 2 of them with attenuators. You've also got feedback on the FM, which is really cool. That's got an attenuator as well, CV in. Chord mode, like I said, an A and a B output. A and B have got independent pitch control, so it's quite easy. B won't track the chord as well, only output A does. So it's really nice getting a sort of sub bass and chord out of the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, with mine, I've been using it for drones, quite the opposite of drums.
I think it's quite nice because you've got your 4 operators. It's quite nice to let some of them drone and have some of them with an envelope going into them.
Yeah.
Because you kind of have those chords where it sounds quite polyphonic, even though it's coming out through a single out.
Yeah, well, what's nice is, depending on what mode you're in, if you're in, say, the ABC mode where operator A will modulate B, and then B that's already modulated by A will modulate C, and then C that's modulated by B that's modulated by A will modulate D at the end. The level on the D just becomes like your output VCA. You just put a final amp envelope in it. It's one of those that if you've got just modulation to throw at it, it's a full voice, so it sort of warrants its size, I think.
It does. It definitely does. Yeah.
The only bit of hardware that I think that's ever brought all those controls out onto separate knobs. I'm sure there's been probably like dedicated controllers made for the DX series and
well, there was one. If anyone wants to check it out, I can't remember the name of it now. I think it was made by a company in the Netherlands, maybe. It was a fully hands-on knob controller back in the day when the DX7 came out, a few years after, for the DX7, and it was actually bigger than the DX7. So imagine a keyboard like that, and it was blue, and I think there was about 20 of them made. I think Brian Eno ended up getting one, but it's basically all the functionality of it. It's actually bigger than the DX7.
There must have just about hundreds of knobs.
It was just I mean, it looks great. It's just like
I found it. Let me pull this up just to show people.
Yeah, for modular knob lovers, they're going to love this.
Where are we looking? There we go. Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, that's great.
Listen, if that's as long as a DX7, that's crazy.
It's slightly bigger, I'm sure of it. By looking at that, it looks like he just fits on the top of it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Not at all. It's massive.
It's just bonkers, isn't it? I mean, I imagine it's super powerful. I feel the same way about Akemie's Castle that isn't massive. So just going back to that one then, Greg, what's going on in your patch for this one?
Well, I'm taking the two out. I've got two lines coming from the BeatStep Pro. The lower kind of bass one, the one that you say is steady, the B out, is the lower kind of bass tone. I've got two. They're essentially the same patch, the two patch examples that I've done. And the higher one is kind of a string type sound. Is coming out from the A out. And then I've got the LFO, the black LFO, going into the operator 1 with stepped voltages going through the microscale, coming out through the sequential switch. So that's kind of all that's doing is acting as an on-off, the LFO, coming in at certain parts with a trigger coming in from the BeatStep Pro, and then it's all coming out to the black DSP with a delay and reverb on it.
Yeah, that's cool. So is it doing the chord sounds?
Yeah, that's what it's doing. I wanted to do like a chord example because that's what most people are going to pick one up for.
Yeah.
There's then a bit of LFO or a bit of envelope come back into the feedback as well, which comes in at certain parts.
Yeah, you can hear it. It adds a bit more grit in the top.
Yeah.
Right. I think having that on some sort of pseudo random is really cool. Almost like what you do with if you had an accent output on a sequencer, just have the accents give this little burst of extra bit of something on the top. It's not quite noise, although it gets there if you rack the feedback up when I've been playing around.
I found it's quite nice for making string sounds as well. At certain points, you get certain points where it just sounds nice on string sounds. And if you roll off that attack, if you just have an attack that's rolled off a little bit, it makes really, really nice string sounds.
Yeah, the chord mode goes to unison, I think, all the way around as well, which is nice if you just want those sort of thick, swarmy kind of sounds. And again, a bit like the Loquelic, it will do super sweet, 4 sine waves, soft levels of modulation, but it'll do super harsh as well if you want.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Really controllable way. It's really cool. And then for the other type of phase distortion as opposed to phase modulation, I think I got a bit giddy when I named my last example. World's dirtiest signs. I'm sure you could all take the challenge and deliberately make some even filthier sounding sounds from sine waves, but it's a really simple patch. There's drums in there which I put in this patch example just for the sake of showing everything that's going on. But it's really simple. It's using the triple bipolar VCA, which I'd say is absolutely essential for the PDO. It normals the outputs of 3 of the oscillators to the VCA, and then you've got a bipolar bias control, so negative gain or positive gain, and CV, and then it goes back in to modulate itself. So it saves a lot of patching, and you would need probably an inverter, a mixer, and a triple VCA if you didn't have that. But it's the same sort of thing as the Akemie's Castle, where you've got the first oscillator. These are all 4 sine waves in this example, purely a sine, nothing modulating it. That modulates the phase at exactly the same pitch as the second oscillator. The now modulated second oscillator modulates the third. The third one modulated by the first 2. Well, modulated by the second that's modulated by the first, then modulates the final 4th output. And I just take the output into a mixer with some drums. And it's just a couple of LFOs. You can see I'm using the sequencer 1, taking the 2 CV outputs to the first oscillator modulating the second, and the second modulating the third, and then just manually play around. But you get some really cool, and again, it's about this pitch stability for me with this sort of thing. Really filthy when you want it to be, or you can keep it reined back quite nicely. It'll go super harsh like the Loquelic. All of the 4 oscillators can be a range of waves. Some interesting shapes and some just standard analog squares and saws, triangles and sines. But it's just 4 sine waves, and it gets super filthy. I think it's a bit of an underrated one, the PDO. I think maybe being a bit older, people don't seem as sort of hyped up about it. I don't know, has anyone played with one?
No.
I mean, I only got it because I bought a Casio CZ1. I wondered what this, as you said, James, for yourself, I was curious about what this difference between the sort of terminology was.
You have the anti-aliasing filter to go with it, Ben?
Yeah, I have, but I've not used it. Funnily, it sounds gorgeous. I think it's a Butterworth low-pass filter. Yeah. That's the topology on it. It sounds really nice, but as you sweep that all the way down, which will completely cut the sound off, you hear like this aliasing trail on the filter. It's kind of weird. I don't know if mine's actually broken or if they all do that. Or like if it shuts too far down and then it's pulling, almost like it's pulling some sampling rate down, but that's just an analog filter, so that doesn't really make sense. It's nice. I use it, but I tend to use it for just more softly nudging top end in and out. It's not my sort of, like you would in an acid line or a saw wave bass line, really opening and closing sort of thing.
It was developed pretty much as an expander for the PDO, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, it's cool that they all share the same cutoff control, but the 4 ins, you've got 4 ins and 4 outs, and again, you can have them normal around the back, or just use it as a 4 in, 4 out filter. Or there's a sum output if you want to mix them all. But I don't. It's not essential. It's good and it sounds great. There's a nice sweep on it. But the bipolar VCA, I would say, is absolutely essential to get the most out of it. You take up more space trying to do it in individual modules.
Yeah.
So yeah, that runs us through all those patch examples. Just to finish off on a shorter sort of note, I think we've covered everything really for oscillators. A good long overview. What about making oscillators out of other things? Any quick tips for people that may be getting into this, don't realise that you can make noise in other ways?
Easiest might be self-cycling LFO, anything that can go into a cycle mode. Those will usually, or not LFO, sorry, an envelope. I hate to be the one who always throws out maths, but maths. and you can also push those either higher or lower rates, usually with the voltage offset. So if like masks can go pretty fast, but some envelopes may be on the slower side. But if they have a decay or attack or both CV in, if you push a negative or positive voltage into that, you can push it faster.
Yeah. And any LFO that a lot of oscillators go down into LFO range. A lot of LFOs come up into audio range to some extent. You can often get both. An oscillating filter is a kind of obvious one that, well, obvious for us that are in it. But I remember when I was getting in and people saying, "Oh, you'll get a great sign out of a filter." I'm just thinking, well, no, I won't. It's a filter. I thought they meant filter out, a saw wave down to something pure and simple, but no, getting the resonance up so it will oscillate. And then you've got
certainly back in earlier days, when you didn't have as much modules, using a filter like that was great. Like you just said, the sine waves just seemed so much more pure, and you can get these fantastic kind of sort of sparkling, twittering edges with a filter like that.
Yeah, and you can see it in your case behind you, this spectral multiband. You get those resonating and oscillating. That could be treated as 6 oscillators that will all track together. That gets into that sort of additive synth type thing because you can level control 6 of them.
Yeah.
Granted, it doesn't have all the scan and stuff built in like the Verbos, but you could sort of do it with the right CV. So that could get interesting. And with a spectral multiband as well, you can push them. They're not harmonics of each other. You can push these bands wide apart. And another one I like doing for more atonal stuff, because it's quite dirty sounding, but just turning the decay up full on the herb verb from make noise.
Yeah.
Modulating the size, when you modulate the rate of a delay or a size of a reverb, and you get that really jerking, like metallic, like stuff being ragged around kind of sound. Envelopes into the reverb size when it's oscillating, and that into a low pass gate is great for percussion. And you've got all the tonal control on there with the sort of tone pot and the dampening of the reverb, so you can really easily sculpt these sort of atonal drones and percussion. It'd be a good one as a source sound for your type of patches, James, where you're using one that will drone, one that will be more spiky and percussive. It would be.
I've used that on a couple recordings where like the background drone is just the reverb going, and I think I have the size set on the random or the modulation set to random for the shape, and that kind of like kicks it into gives it a little kick, and then it restabilizes just in time for it to get kicked again and destabilize.
Yeah. Cool. Well, has anyone got anything to round off on before we finish?
I'd hate to sidetrack us too much, but do we want to count like the rings, Mysteron elements of the world as oscillators?
I guess they are. Their voices in themselves. It's a funny one because a resonator technically is a processor, but
exactly.
You put a bit of voltage in, or you strike it, or it then becomes a voice, and it rings, for example, which is the sort of right hand part of elements. It only has that little voltage pulse that triggers on the input, but it very much feels like an oscillator. It's a kind of funny grey area, really. But that's definitely something to touch on, the whole modal synthesis thing. I think elements and rings being the resonator side, they're the only 2 modules that do modal synthesis.
Those are the only ones I know of, because the Mysteron is like waveguides, so it's different, even if they may try and tread in similar territories of modeling physical things. I think rings and elements are the only modal-based ones.
Yeah, and that whole synthesis method is based on an impulse and a resonator, and the interaction of the 2.
Isn't there an audio damage one as well?
Oh, that one. That one could be. I mean, that's he was trying to do like physical modeling with that one.
Oh,
right? Or is that FM?
There's the proton delay, which is K plus strong synthesis.
Oh, that's right. Okay, yeah.
What he showed at Super Booth, the sort of the fully featured delay that will do all the audio rate K plus things. And I think a bit like rings, it's got the sort of handy burst of noise at the input if you want it, just to make it quick and easy. But that'll do. I guess that's more along, although done differently, a bit like Mr. They're sort of that plucked string, carpless kind of stuff.
Yeah, an impulse into some kind of tuned and filtered delay line. Yeah, I guess those are on that half, and then certainly Elements is the only one I can think of that has real samples of struck things that you can use as the impulses. I always thought that was kind of neat.
Yeah, different plucks and stick drops on different things. But we'll come. I mean, this has been fairly comprehensive, not by any means brief. We're on a sort of usual nearly 2 hours kind of stretch. Which is great. I'm really glad people are sticking with us and watching this stuff. I really enjoy this sort of content, long-form content myself. But that's a sort of overview of oscillators, analog, digital, all the different stuff you might find, some patch examples. We'll definitely be focusing in on certain episodes. We might do an episode just on wavetables, just on complex oscillators. We'll really sort of zone in on specific ones in the future. As always, if anyone's got any questions, leave them below. We'll make sure that we get all the links for both patch examples and the stuff we're mentioning in the descriptions. Does anyone want to sort of plug anything? Anything they want to sign off on?
I've got 2 albums done, and there's a 3rd on the way. You can find them on jimdrones.bandcamp.com.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. We'll definitely do a more specific interview with you, James, specific about this album and the process. And
oh, cool.
We've got the first one. I know we've been listening and enjoying the first one.
Enjoyed it, yeah.
We'll check out.
Thanks. I'll make sure to get you guys the second one too to listen to.
Yeah, we'll try and we'll come up with some questions about it all. And once the second one's out, we'll try and time an interview around people being able to check it out around the same time. And but yeah, Jim Drones is a good name.
Thank you.
He goes with the Drone Lord T-shirt, which is competition for you, Matthew. You're sort of a drone lord.
Well, this is it. Yeah, we need Battle of the Drones.
The UK versus US drone challenge.
Well, yeah.
There's always room for drones.
Oh, yeah, there is. There is.
Cool. Well, yeah. Be sure to check all the links out below, and we'll see everyone soon.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. It was great.
Thanks, guys.
See you later.